My father provided an example of who not to be. If there were shitcoins when my mother was alive, she would have been a shitcoiner. This is going to be arrogant. Anything I put my mind to, I get. And I thought to myself, here I am, a messenger for the Sterling National Bank. And I was wearing a $5,000 Armani suit and a $1,000 pair of Armani shoes. This is part of the reason why I like being a doctor. Patients teach me more than I teach them. In the emergency room, and I looked at her fingers and she had nails like you, and the guy's tissues were underneath her fingers. So this told me she fought like an animal. I fought for her. 2 billion deaths. That's the punch in the mouth that everybody needs.
All views expressed by the host or guests are solely their own opinions. Nothing stated in this podcast should be considered a specific endorsement to make any particular investment or follow any specific strategy.
Welcome to All in Bitcoin. Jack, I've spent hours diving into your work, and while you have shared a lot about decentralized medicine, today I want to focus on something more personal, your inner journey and your path as a Bitcoiner. I believe our listeners will gain a lot from understanding what shaped you into the advocate you are today. Ready?
Yeah.
Let's kick things off with my 21 takes on you, and we'll take it from there.
Okay.
Jack, you're known as a bit of a bulldog, and you probably have to be to take on Big Pharma and these huge institutions head on. What I really want to know is this. Every superhero has a turning point, like Batman, who lost his parents and became the relentless crime fighter we know today. So what happened early in your life that set you on this path?
I don't think it was early in my life. It was much later in my life. Early in my life, I wanted to be a professional baseball player, and I was on the path to do that, and then my mother derailed it. So I'd say my mother was probably the real reason I'm on the path that I'm on now.
Why did you say your mother derailed it?
I was drafted twice to play professional baseball, and I was offered a lot of money. I turned down $1 million to actually go and stay in school. And this was after I had already been in professional school for a while. Why? Because I graduated early. I skipped 2 grades. So I finished college when I was 19 and a half. So I still had eligibility left to play. So I had already been in professional school. I was in dental school at the time and went and played again. And my mother bribed me to actually stay on the path that I was. So she bought me a car. And back then I was stupid enough to think that that really mattered, but it mattered to me because when I grew up in New York, I was a poor white kid in New York City. And you learn really fast about the value of things when you're poor and you live in the richest city in the world.
You mentioned growing up in New York City on welfare.
Correct.
What do you remember most about that time, and how did it shape your sense of ambition?
When you grow up poor in New York City and you see people that have tremendous wealth, you ask yourself the question, why don't I have this and they do? And the answer was steeped in who I came from, the orchard, the apple, the tree that I came from. I was a different kind of apple. And I was fortunate to meet a lot of these wealthy people. And I started to ask them questions that you would ask your parents. And my parents said to me, why didn't you ask us any of these questions? I said, why would I ask you when you're poor? That is how I was built when I was a kid. No one in my family had ever even been to college at this time. So for me, it was a natural thing to ask the people who are successful, what did you do? And how did you get here? And how can I morph that into my life by making different decisions than the people who I come from, the orchard? So I was the apple that rolled down the mountain into another pasture completely. To this very day, I don't have a lot of things in common with the people that I come from.
Why do you think your mother wanted you to study instead of letting you become a professional sportsman and be wealthy?
Well, I think the real reason for that is when I was young, the teachers told her that this kid's brain is really special. And I never realized why I was as smart as I was when I was young until later on. My mother told me the story when she was pregnant. She wound up having a miscarriage, and she prayed to St. Jude after the miscarriage. That's the saint of hopeless cases, that she would have another baby. So then I come along. But what did she do to change the situation? Now, my mother doesn't know any physics. She doesn't know, of course, anything I teach people now. But she sat outside in Central Park every day and ate a can of salmon. And I believe that that's how I got started on the path. The number one photochemical in our brain is DHA. DHA is from seafood. We have more of it in our brain than any other animal on the planet. So the fact that my mother lived in a horrible city, but she was always outside eating this substance that actually you need to build a really good brain, I think was very interesting. When I came out, I was 2 years old. My mother put me in nursing school. The nursery school, I think, was a Catholic place. And that's when the nuns told my mother, they said, this kid is too disruptive. He knows too much. I knew my ABCs, my numbers, multiplication by the time I was 2 years old. I always asked questions. My family used to say when we had meetings, where does all this come from? Like they thought that my mother or my father stimulated this. No.
What were the topics of conversation at the dinner table at home?
Ooh. It was that's one thing that I think my mother was really good at. She would always try to quench my curiosity, meaning she brought me books. She brought me to the library. She's the one that brought me to the museums the first time to tell me that this resource was available in New York City. That's when I was really young. And I loved that because it was like I was a sponge and I was absorbing everything. My father, he was interested in sports, but he was never any good at any sport, which I thought was kind of interesting. But his life, I think it was affected by the wars, because when he was born and the fact that he was involved in World War II and also the Korean War. So a large part of his life that he could develop to do things, I think was taken away from him. And I think that's just a virtue of the time that he was born, because he was the son of an immigrant. And my grandmother came from Ireland, like 59th latitude. And she lived on the 6th floor of a building in Manhattan on 81st Street. There was no elevator. You used to have to walk all the way up and all the way down. And my grandmother lived until she was 94 years old. She did this every day. To see that for the first, I'd say probably 12, 13 years of my life, because I used to go to see my grandmother a lot in New York City, it let me understand that where I lived in Queens and where my grandmother lived there was a big disconnect, a real big disconnect. And to know that my grandmother lived that way for a long time, that made an impact on me. I realized that early on, I'm going to say as a young child, the impact of money on how people live their life was huge. I didn't truly understand all of the collateral effects from it, but I knew at a very early age the difference between have and have nots, but also in between there. Like we always say black and white. I was very fortunate because New York also showed me there's a lot of gray. And I was very interested in the gray. And I saw the gray every place that I went when I went to Manhattan. And when I was born in Manhattan. I lived in Manhattan until I was, I think, 7 or 8 years old. And then I moved to Queens. And when you live in Manhattan, you live in Queens, even though you're in New York City, totally different The people at that time in Manhattan, it was still a little bit of a melting pot. Like you had neighborhoods that were certain immigrants, and everybody stayed like where they were supposed to be. But Queens was totally different. Queens was actually where I met my first person from El Salvador. It's where I met my first person from Colombia. It's where I met my first person from Korea, my first person from China. And that was really good when I was 6, 7, 8 years old, because the things that we were starting to do and the things that they were used to doing as immigrants, we got mixed together in like a pot of stew. And it turned out to be a really good thing because I got to meet their parents, they got to meet me, and their parents were fascinated by me, and I was fascinated to learn about their culture and their countries and ask them, why did you come here? And I found the answers that I got from them mirrored what I found between Manhattan and Queens. It's very, very similar. In other words, the story of people being 10,000 miles away from home was the same as being 10 miles away between Manhattan and Queens.
I understand. You're looking for a better life.
It was not always a better life. It was actually sometimes opportunity. Sometimes it was, for example, one of my Argentine and Chilean friends, her father was a doctor and he was very well educated, but he couldn't get a job being a doctor in that part of the world at that time. Her father sat me down and told me what it was like to live in those countries in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. And I was like, let me get this straight. You're a doctor and you're poor. And I said to him, I said, you know, where my father works in Manhattan, all the doctors have a bronze placard on the outside of their buildings on Park Avenue, Madison Avenue, and Fifth Avenue, and none of them are poor. They all drive Mercedes-Benz, Rolls-Royce, Cadillacs. And he said to me, he goes, well, that's the difference. He goes, that's the real reason we came here. And he goes, I thought that I would be able to do the same thing as those doctors in the United States, and it turned out I was not able to. That's my first foray into centralized medicine. They actually blocked him from going to medicine unless he would go back to school and go through training so they could do a wallet biopsy for money. Money, which of course he didn't have. But I thought it was an incredible waste of resources that we would make somebody do that had smarts that could help people right here and right now. You know, and these are things that you put in your time bank account. I think when you become a little bit older and you have more sovereignty yourself, you don't forget them. They actually begin to form who you are.
When you were a kid, who were your enemies?
I don't think I really had any enemies. I always look for opportunities in people. Even I remember my grandfather taught me this lesson, and this lesson has reverberated in my life. He told me that you have to find the good in even the worst people. He told me, we were sitting on the porch of his summer house, and he said to me, everybody has good in them. And I'll tell you who we were talking about. I can tell you the day. It was the beginning of August of 1977 when Elvis Presley died. And at the same time, this summer, there was some bad stuff going on in New York City where they had the Son of Sam shooter going around shooting people. And my grandfather told me, with the Son of Sam, there's some reason in his environment that this guy has gone crazy to do this. And he said, I know people want to kill this guy, and I know they want to catch them and put him in jail and dissect. He says, but you need to be introspective and find out what it is that made them this way.
How would you describe your mother?
Very compliant. She never questioned the status quo. And that turned out to be a good thing for me because I'm 180 degrees opposite that. If she wasn't that way, I don't think that I would be who I am. And I didn't like the way people treated her. And I couldn't believe that she never adapted. And I kept telling her, I said, do you realize the reason why you're getting treated the way you're getting treated is because you accept you trust. She was the opposite of a Bitcoiner. If there were shitcoins when my mother was alive, she would have been a shitcoiner. And we would have had fights about that. But the corollary to that, if she wasn't like that, I don't think she would have had a son like me.
If your dad walked in the room right now, what do you think he would say to you?
Not much.
And what would you say to him?
Not much. My dad wasn't a big part of my life. My mom was the much bigger half. The one thing I will say, my father provided an example of who not to be. So from that standpoint, I look at my father like a photograph because we develop from the negatives. And I don't need to say anything to him because with a photograph, you don't talk to it.
And if your mother walked in the room right now, what do you think she would say to you?
I'd say to her, you would be like my mother with 50 questions to ask me, because that's what my mother would want to know. She would ask me, how did this happen? How did that happen? Why did this happen? Why did, your relationship with your sister go the way it went? And, those are the things my mother would have been interested in, because the one thing my mother realized about me when I was very young, that I didn't think like anybody in my family. And my mother was always fascinated by that. And she used to say to me when we would walk in the park together or go to the museum, what do you see when you see this? And I'd sit down. I remember we were in the Hall of Mammals one time in the Museum of Natural History. And she said, well, tell me what you see. So then I told her. And she goes, not in a million years do I see that. And she goes, and yet you're my son. And that's when I said to her, I said, that's because the environment that we're in is different, Mom. I said, and you don't understand. You've been taught to believe, that it's all about the genes. You've bought that story. I was a young kid at the time. I didn't even believe that, even then.
How young?
I was probably 8, 9 years old. There was a very big moment in my mother's life that happened when I was in 4th grade. And I had skipped 3rd grade. And I went into 4th grade and we got the first report card. And those in the days when you go to public school in New York City, you get a report card, you go home, you have to have your mother sign it. So my mother would sign it, I'd bring it back. But my new teacher, her name is Miss Shinazi, she gave me an envelope with my report card. And it had a note in it. She goes, give this to your mother. I'm like, okay. I didn't know what it was about. So I hand it to my mother. When she signs it, she opens it up. And the teacher asked my mother to come see her. This is the first time ever that a teacher asked to see my mother. So, of course, my mother thought right away that I did something bad. So my mother says, you're coming with me because if you did something bad, you're going to get your ass whipped. So we go to the school and the teacher was surprised to see me. But I told her, I said, my mother made me come. And she goes, all right, go sit in the front. And she's sitting at the desk in the back of the classroom. And she tells my mother, she goes, do you know what you have? That was her first question. And I could hear them. They thought I couldn't hear, but I could hear them. And my mother looked at her, and just, what do you mean? What do I have? She goes, do you know what you have in that kid? And she goes, I don't really understand what you mean. She goes, Miss Kruse, she goes, I have four children. All of them are doctors. She goes, he's smarter than them at this age of his life. She goes, he's right now doing a project of how chickens form. She said, this is not a little project. He's built an incubator with lights and everything else. I sent him to the museum and he came back. I had to give him a special pass to go to the adult library. She goes, he's in 4th grade. He just skipped 3rd grade. She goes, there's nobody like this kid. She goes, I've been a teacher for over 30 years. She goes, where'd this come from? My mother told her, she goes, he's always been like this. They put me in something called SP, which is fast track, 7th grade. And I was totally bored. I wound up skipping 8th grade after that and go straight to 9th. 9th grade was pretty boring. There was nothing in 9th grade for me at all. But that's actually when I started to really focus in on sports. And I would go to Central Park and play baseball with people that were 20, 22 years old, people that were in college, and they would pay me to be on their team.
Were you a strong kid?
Oh, yeah. And not only that, I could hit like crazy. At the time, I was probably like 13, 14 years old, and I was outplaying people that are 20, 22 years old in the Central Park leagues. And I would catch, because I was a catcher, both games of the doubleheader, and sometimes I'd make $150, $200. Back then, this was a lot of money. And I loved it. I absolutely loved that I could use something I was really good at and make money. See, and that was another big part of the journey that I said, okay, if you're good at something, you get something of value back. It's actually the first real proof of work mechanism that I came into contact with. So I think that's the reason why I always wanted to play baseball, because it's the first time that I did something endogenously that was me that I could turn into money. And that's when the teachers in high school said, well, what do you want to do, when you grow up? I'm like, well, I don't really know, but I think I want to play baseball, or I want to play football. And then right at that time, and I think it happened on purpose, is my grandfather got diagnosed with cancer, melanoma in his mouth, which is unusual. And I wound up going to the doctor with him. And that's where I met the first doctor that I really ever met in my life. His name is Dr. Deutsch. He was an oral surgeon in New York City. And he told me what was going on with my grandfather. And after meeting me several times, he knew that I was pretty smart. So my grandfather went to see him a lot, 2 or 3 times a week. And eventually my grandfather had to go and have surgery at Columbia Presbyterian, which is one of the best hospitals in New York City. And when he went there, I had gone to the library to find out all the things that were cutting edge at the time for the type of surgery that my grandfather needed to have. Just so you realize, at this time I'm 15, right there. And I walked into the surgeon's office at Columbia Presbyterian, and my grandfather warned the doctor, you're going to meet my grandson and he's got a lot of questions for you. And when he told my grandfather and my grandmother the situation, that's when I said, okay, well, what about this? Why can't we take his intestine out and rebuild his esophagus? And the guy looked at me like, who are you? And I handed him papers. He goes, you read these papers? I said, yeah. I said, not only that, I understand it. So tell me why my grandfather can't have this. And I found the answer out, because this guy couldn't do it.
Didn't know how to, or
No,
couldn't be done
not
at
only
the time?
didn't know how to do it, but didn't even read these papers. I read them before him. So I told my grandfather, I said, look, I think you need to go see somebody else. And that's when I went back and talked to the oral surgeon and to get his advice, because he always told me the truth. This was the first time in my life that I saw a centralized doctor lie straight to my grandfather. And that didn't sit too well with me. Long story short, it wouldn't have mattered what happened, because the disease was pretty far down the path. And my grandfather at the time was 81. He wound up dying from that disease. But it turned out his sickness and his death was when I started to have the idea, well, if I don't play baseball, I need to become a doctor, so I'm not like this asshole that my grandfather saw at Columbia Presbyterian.
Who have been the most influential mentors in your life, and why?
Einstein, Michelangelo, Da Vinci, and then a Jewish guy named Mr. Strelson from the penthouse at 75th and 5th Avenue. He is the gentleman that taught me everything I know about fractional reserve banking. He was the CEO and owner of Sterling National Bank. He was one of the rich people that I met. And my father worked in the building that he owned the penthouse. Mr. Straussen was a personal friend of Donald Trump. So I knew a lot of things that as a young boy, that I probably should have known. And Mr. Straussen hired me to work for him. It was the first real job that I ever had.
As a what?
Oh, I was a messenger boy. I'd go around New York City with papers like contracts. One time I found out that I had bearer bonds. I had like $10 million in bearer bonds. And he told me after I delivered them to American Express in the World Trade Center, he said, I wanted to see if you were trustworthy. But I will tell you, this is probably the single most important meeting I ever had in my life. The day that he hired me, I was sitting at his desk. I was wearing my father's suit and my father's shoes because I didn't have any. And I crossed my legs and he saw that in the bottom of one of the shoes had a hole in it. When he was finished interviewing me, because we talked a lot, he wanted to find out if I was really smart like he had heard. He sent me to Barney's on Fifth Avenue to meet one of his tailors. He put me in an Armani suit and shoes that cost $1,000. And the gentleman who dressed me said, Mr. Straussen wants you to go back to his house after this is over and he wants to talk to you. And I came back and he goes, do you understand why I sent you to have the best suit and the best shoes? And I said, no, I think you're crazy. He goes, if you're going to represent me, you're going to look the part. That was a big lesson. This is how rich people play. In other words, appearances really matter. If you are going to be taken seriously, you have to be able to back up what you have. And I thought to myself, here I am, a messenger for the Sterling National Bank. I mean, in this bank, I don't think you could be lower as an employee than I was. And I was wearing a $5,000 Armani suit and $1,000 pair of Armani shoes.
How old were you?
14 or 15. And it made probably the biggest impression in my entire life, that meeting.
Tell me a childhood dream that came true.
This is going to be arrogant. Anything I put my mind to, I get. But I will tell you, I'm very focused. I didn't have a lot of dreams. I was very much a realist. And when I put my mind to something, it always manifested. Why? Because I put the work in to get what I wanted. And many people didn't understand why I didn't want to do what all other kids did. I was very focused on sports and probably learning things that were new. I mean, to this day, I'm in my 60s now. I have never met anybody who's more curious than me yet. Like every day, something happens where if I get challenged, I want to learn. If I decide to challenge you, I'm going to challenge you because I know when I challenge you, there's something that's going to come out of that interaction that's going to give me a new nugget to study, to go down. This is part of the reason why I like being a doctor. Patients teach me more than I teach them.
When did you realize you were different?
This will probably stun people. Not until I was at my first year of residency at LSU. I basically played sports, didn't break a sweat in the classroom, and had spectacular grades. But even at that time, I never thought I was going to do anything with the schoolwork. I thought it was always going to be baseball. And then after my grandfather died, I kept up with Dr. Deutsch. And he would say, you can come in anytime. And I would go in his office. We would always talk about sports. He was a Yankee fan, so I didn't really like him that much. I was a Met fan. And we would talk about football. We'd talk about my family. And then he always brought it back. He goes, do you really think you're going to play professional baseball? Or what do you think about doing this? And I said, well, if I do this, I want to do what you do. And I told him the reason why. You told me the truth. You directed me to the places, that I should go for my grandfather to help him out. And when I went to those places, I found out that these people are full of shit and they're liars. And I said, that kind of soured me on this. And he said to me, he goes, you realize that the people are full of shit? They're not everywhere. In other words, there's people out there that you can trust and rely on. So he's the one that first told me at this time that there was 4 oral surgery programs in the United States. These were brand new, where you get your dental degree and you get your medical degree. You get both. And they shaved 2 years off. And I was like, oh. I went to the school closest to me that had the oral surgery program, that had the double degree program. And that was the University of Connecticut. And probably the most arrogant Jack Kruse ever occurred on my interview for dental school. I was with a guy, Cornelius Pommier, from France and Austria. So he's European. And he was a crown and bridge expert. Okay. That's what he did. He was my first interview. And he sat down and he goes, tell me why you want to be a dentist. And I said, I don't want to be a dentist. And he looked at me. I said, I want to be an oral surgeon. And then I proceeded to tell him the story that I told you about my grandfather. And he goes, well, that's extraordinary. He said, but you know that most people who come into dental school, they want to be either an orthodontist or an oral surgeon because those are the people that are at the top of the class and they make the most money. And I said, I'm not most people. I said, if I tell you I'm going to be an oral surgeon, I'm going to be an oral surgeon. That's how arrogant I was at the time. And he said to me, he goes, well, one of the problems with this school to do oral surgery is it's very rigorous. Because they have the double degree program, you have to go to school with the medical students for 2 years. You have to take exactly the same classes. And because you do that, it makes it very difficult to finish the dental school in 2 years. So many people don't graduate on time. And I said to Cornelius Pommier, I said, not only will I finish on time, I will finish early. And my whole last year, I'm going to go to an oral surgery program and intern there because I'm going to be an oral surgeon. I actually told him this 4 years before. So now let's fast forward to what happens. I finished dental school in 3 years. Okay. I go to LSU for my whole 4th year dental school. And this is the first time in my life that I was put in a great white shark tank with a bunch of other residents who are the best in the country. This program was the best in the country at the time. And it was the best place for me to go because it was a measuring stick for me to see how good or bad I was. That was the first time. That's when I realized, okay, I got it. When I got to LSU, this is the first time in my life I was ever challenged by the program, by how difficult things were. It's very difficult to have to read and become a savage, but stay up all night and do and take care of people with problems. I used to love to sleep, but it was the first 6 months of not sleeping and still being a savage was probably one of the biggest wake-up calls for me. That's actually how I became a neurosurgeon. When they got a hold of me and they saw what I was, they were like, this kid's different. And at the time when we did brain surgery on people, we would put wires back in their skull to put it back on. And I thought this was the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life because you would see people, 2 years after a brain tumor or a subdural, and their skull would be sucked into the head and you could see the wires out here. I said, why don't you guys just use plates and screws like we do in oral surgery? Like when we fix a jaw, we fix and they looked at me like, well, we don't know how to do that. I said, okay. And I called my nurse. In fact, my nurse that still works with me today. I said, Chantal, go get me the plates and screws. And they brought them in And I showed them how to do that. This is this is like 1990, 91. And we start doing surgeries like that. And these guys let me do surgeries that probably I shouldn't have been doing. I was already a doctor, not with a technical certificate, but I had a lot of experience. And this paid off in my first rotation in oral surgery. I was handpicked by one of the best neurosurgeons in the world. His name's David Klein. He just passed away this year, or in the end of 24. And I loved him. We used to call him the boss. He was more like my father. I had ultimate respect for him. He was smart, but he had so much wisdom, but he was very humble. And he knew that I was smart, but I was not humble. And he handled me perfectly.
How?
When I was going through my residency, I was married, I had my son, and we got divorced. I didn't even have a discussion with my wife. This gives you a little flavor of how Jack Kruse was at this time. I didn't have the discussion with my wife that I was going to switch from oral surgery to neurosurgery. She was a pediatrician. She had already got a job lined up after I had a job in oral surgery lined up in Arizona. And I'm like, no, you're going to offer me this? This is the hardest and best thing in medicine. I'm all in. I didn't discuss it with anybody. Dr. Klein gave me 24 hours to make my mind up, and I didn't talk to her about it at all. And she goes, well, this is not going to be good for me. I don't want to sign up for 7 more years living in New Orleans. And I said, okay, see ya. That's it. That's really how it went down. And it was probably a dick thing to do, but ultimately, I told you when I was a kid, you put a challenge in front of me, I'm very interested.
But how did your mentor help you?
Neurosurgeons tend to get married a lot, get divorced a lot, because our job, we're really married to our job. We're married to our patients. We're not married to our family. And one of the big mistakes that Dr. Klein made in his life is that he didn't spend a lot of time with his children. So when I got divorced early on, right, literally when I switched into neurosurgery, my son at the time was, I think he was 3-4 months old. Dr. Klein gave me off every Tuesday afternoon, threw me out of the operating room and forced me to go see my kid. And that's when I spent time with my son. I got to do that my entire residency. The only time that got interrupted was in my chief year, because you're the boss then, you can't take off. But I will never forget that.
Tell us about the most unexpected influence on your career.
It was a young girl when I was a chief resident who came into my operating room. She was raped or attempted rape. She was coming home from Catholic school, and one of the guys that tried to rape her took a brass lantern and smashed her head, and this side of her head was on the opposite side of her head. And in the emergency room, the nurses told me to look at her fingers. And I looked at her fingers, and she had nails like you, and the guy's tissues were underneath her fingers. So this told me she fought like an animal. As soon as I saw that, I fought for her.
You've mentioned feeling frustrated. What's the main cause of that frustration?
Oh, that's a multifaceted one. I think my frustration then and now is different. I think my frustration then, when people get opportunity, you should take it. You should jump without wings. People don't understand. Time is not promised to anybody. You have the opportunity to do something. There's opportunity cost in not doing it. That was my frustration, I think, with my mother, with my family, even my ex-wife, but it changed. It changed tremendously. When I got into residency, I was frustrated with the centralization. The centralization hit me in a lot of different ways, but the number one thing that hit me, I was taught the benefits of centralization for education. But when you are a doctor, especially a surgeon, and you're in the operating room theater, it's just like being in a war. Rules and regulations don't work in a war. When you are in my operating room, it's me and you. Everybody else is superfluous. You are there to serve me. I am the king. My job is to make sure that you get off the operating room table and I fix your problem. And we're successful and you can talk to me in the recovery room. I think a lot of times that's what gets neurosurgeons into trouble. That's the reason why we have the reputations that we do, because people don't understand who we really are. Is we are trained to play 4D chess all the time. And we're doing that to make sure that you have a good outcome. And sometimes, things happen what's beyond your control. Sometimes you can't fix Humpty Dumpty when they come in really broken, but you have to give them your best shot. And I think one of the things that can be a problem is I generalize that experience on the people around me. I was pretty tough on everybody, but not tough that they wouldn't like me. I was like a drill sergeant, and you can still see that in me today. Like, I don't tolerate bullshit from anybody.
You talk about your frustrations when you were a child and also through your residency. What about now in your 60s, as you say? What are your frustrations right now?
That's simple. That's Bobby Kennedy, Maha. That's El Salvador. That's the world. That's Israel. That's like the British royal family, the World Economic Forum. I just can't believe that we're this far off track. That people actually think centralization and communism and fascism is a good idea. That people in the United States, the freest people in the world who have the illusion of freedom, are now ready to become Venezuela and put their hands on, put the cuffs on. To me, that's unbelievable. You said it with a negative connotation when you said frustration.
I didn't.
Right? Do you know what I tell my people? Embrace the suck. Do you know what I learned as a little boy? Embracing the suck is where order comes from. I love chaos. You'll have nobody sitting next to you ever in your life that loves chaos more than me. If you talk to anybody who really knows me, they'll tell you, put Jack in the most chaotic situation and he will thrive. Because when you put somebody in chaos, you find out how well they can think. And then that tells me a lot about you. So if you don't like the chaos, then guess what? I don't want you part of my tribe. I want people that are curious and embrace the chaos to make order out of the chaos, because those are the people ultimately that are going to survive. Those are the Bitcoiners. They verify, they don't trust. They take the chaos and they say, okay, think about it. Anybody who's owned Bitcoin in the great financial crisis in the beginning, this is the biggest shit show in the United States ever. But guess what? Those guys, the cypherpunks, all the chaos around them, they come up with the solution. To me, that's elegant.
Talk to me a little bit about Maha and Bob Kennedy.
Well, I think the frustration is pretty simple. Everybody knows I went to Bitcoin Nashville last year wearing a Bobby Kennedy hat and shirt. Trump was on stage. I know a lot about Trump. I like Trump. He's not the right person that we need to fix medicine. He is probably going to be the right person to fix the banking situation. But when Bobby and Trump joined together, I was like, okay, I'm going to get the best of both worlds. I'm going to have Maha, and Maha started with Nayib Bukele. I wrote Bukele a medical freedom law, and Bobby Kennedy asked for that law before any of you knew about it. Mm-hmm. And the president told me I could share it with him. So Maha started there, and I never said much about it because to me, it wasn't important at that time. But that's when Bobby started to come out to talk about all the things that you heard him talk about before he joined with Trump. In Nashville, when they started to talk about Bitcoin and health and Trump embraced them, my initial feeling was, I think this is a mistake. And the mistake that I thought that Bobby would lose some of his juice, Trump would absorb it, because I felt at the time the only reason Trump was doing this is to get elected. He needed the Bitcoiners and he needed the Maha Moms to get over the edge. So when they joined, if you would have asked me the day after the conference, I had $100,000, I would have put $90,000 Bobby being successful, $10,000 on Trump being successful. Turns out now, Trump's got $100,000 successful and Bobby's got zero. That's where my frustration is right now.
Why do you think that is?
The problem in the United States started on November 22nd, 1963, when the military assassinated JFK. We had a military coup in the United States. It started that day. It still hasn't ended. You know the reason why Nayib Bukele is okay right now? Because the intelligence agencies are not interested in El Salvador. They're interested in putting their guns towards the American citizens. That's what's happening right now. That's why I'm frustrated. Because I never thought they would move the guns from who they had them pointed at to us. And the frustration is even worse because most of the people in the United States don't see what I just told you. And it's playing out on the world stage right now. The people that have leverage over Bobby are the people in the desert, the people in the CIA. The desert people, they're from Israel. Okay? They're the bankers. They're the people that the Bitcoiners can't stand. The Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, okay? The BIS, Belgium. When I did a podcast with Danny Jones in the United States on December 2nd, 2024, I wanted to have this discussion with an American. You know what I was told? I don't want to have this discussion because the people who sponsor my podcast, they happen to be Zionists, and I don't want to go that route. So why do I feel compelled to tell you? Because it's important. Donald Trump earned a lot of trust from me. Why? His best friend was John F. Kennedy Jr., JFK's son. JFK's son was taken out as well, but he made a promise to JFK that if he ever became president, that he would release the files to tell the truth to the American people. Well, guess what? In the first 100 days of his presidency, he did. Now we know, no more questions, the CIA, FBI, the Italian mob, and Israel killed JFK in a conspiracy. No longer a mystery. But you know what the frustration is now? Nobody in America seems to know that we had a military coup. Nobody still gets the implications of that admission. And that is very sad. Why? Because America is dumbed down. So I understand why America doesn't get it. But the people that really need to get this are the Bitcoiners. Because the Bitcoiners are the 2025 version of Paul Revere, of the crazy people that came from Britain and told the king and fought the best army in the world and beat them. We have to now do the same thing. It's there right now is no question about it. In the United States, we're at that level.
You are frustrated about El Salvador?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Bukele gave the people of El Salvador the greatest gift that a politician could ever give. Why? Politicians never give people power and control. Bukele did that. He did that before he put in the exception regime to go after MS-13. So what does that tell you? His priorities were right. Fix the money and then fix everything else. The country's completely changed in 5 years. But what's the frustration? Bukele has to build the middle class out here in El Salvador. That's the single most important thing. But Salvadorians need to take their head out of their ass and buy a little bit of Bitcoin. Because the whole country changes if they understand this very simple idea. This is, you don't even have to think 6 steps ahead, just 1 step ahead. And Bukele, the reason I respect him, in my opinion, the greatest president of any country of all time. I used to put him behind George Washington. Now I think he's exceeded it. He is still buying Bitcoin now when he makes the deal with the IMF. He's telling the IMF, I'm going to do what's right for my people. But the people of El Salvador need to realize they all need to have strike wallets. They all need to have moon wallets. They need to start saving some of their money, even if it's 5 or 10% in Bitcoin and not in American dollars. If they do that, El Salvador could have a bigger ascent than the United States did from 1850 to probably 1945.
Who or what do you watch closely and why?
Nature, always. Nature has taught me more than any person on the planet.
What's the biggest misconception about you?
That I'm an asshole. I understand why people feel that way, but I'm a drill sergeant. Why? Because I look at you, you're asleep. You are totally asleep, and the only way for you to wake up is to get punched in the mouth. So if you come to me, tell me, Jack, I have autoimmune disease or I have a brain tumor, and you tell me you can't do what needs to be done, why are you wasting my time? But that's where the drill sergeant comes out. I will punch you in the mouth until you understand that you are in the battle of your life. You're on the deck of the Titanic, and it's time for you to jump in the cold water, swim to the boat. If you're not willing to do that, then don't ask for my help.
You made radical changes in your life. What was the toughest part of that transformation?
It's kind of funny. If I answered this question when I was going through it, the answer would be different looking back through the retrospectoscope.
Give me both.
Well, I would tell you, I think going through it, I think it was my frustration that people around me didn't see what I saw, didn't think what I think. So they never understood why I did what I did. And I think now, looking back, I understand why some people were disappointed with some of the things that I did. Like the potential energy in my family to take the trajectory I did was really important, but I don't have anything to do with my family now. But did they still play a big role in what I was to become? Yes, but the way in which it unfolded, this probably wasn't the best for them as the story unfolded. Now, do many of them like what I'm doing now? Yeah. But they don't realize that how I was when I was a kid, a teenager, college, all of these experiences, they make you who you are. And I don't have regrets. Like, I believe in the power of now. You only can control now. You can't control the past because it's a memory, and you can't control the future because it's not here. But you know what you can control? Right now. And I believe if you have an idea, you have to execute on the idea, because if you don't, the idea goes away. You delete it. That is the power of now.
How would you describe your old self and your new self?
My old self was scary.
You keep saying, how scary?
I feared nothing.
Okay.
That means I would put myself in situations no one else would ever consider doing, because I was confident, uber confident that I thought I was Superman. But ultimately, did I pay a price for that down the road in my own biology? Yeah, I did. And that's the lesson that I'm trying to teach Bitcoiners right now. Like, understand you have all this money and you're not using the money to put time back in your bank account. What good is it to be Steve Jobs, Hal Finney, or Paul Allen, who are all dead at 60 years old with billions of dollars? It makes no sense to me. It's just poor planning and poor thinking.
Can you briefly explain what you call decentralized medicine?
Yeah, it's medicine that doesn't have a focus on RNA and DNA, doesn't have a focus on Big Pharma. The basis of decentralized medicine is the three-legged stool of life. All of life can be explained by light, water, and magnetism, and how those things come together to build health or disease in you. So, for example, I tell people health is the slowest form of death you create. Disease is when you make a mistake in light, water, or magnetism. That determines the disease you get. All diseases are like on the same subway. They're just different stops.
What do you think it will take for the world to truly take decentralized medicine seriously as a legitimate path to healing?
2 billion deaths. That's the punch in the mouth that everybody needs. I mean, think about it already. When I told the world about SV40, what did the world do? Hiccup. They did nothing. Now you see all these people dying. You've seen it. All the soccer players dropping dead on the field, right? We saw it in the NFL. We see it every day on TV. You have to realize they're going to take you out. So I think it's going to take a lot of deaths the next 15, 20 years. People are going to wake up and go, you know what? We can't trust anybody in the government. And the savages have to rise up. I don't know how many deaths it's going to take, but I can tell you this, the whole 5 years that the world collectively lived through COVID, I'm not optimistic for the people that are in the experimental group. The people in the control group like me, I'm very optimistic for. Those are the people that I do podcasts like this for. Those are the people I write my blogs for. Now, it doesn't mean that the other people can't get a benefit. But remember what I told you before. When people don't value you because they don't use your information, they're telling you right away, why would you extend yourself to help them if they're not willing to help themselves?
Thanks, Jack. That's it for part 1. Where can people follow you and your work?
On social media at Dr.JackKruse. There's a lot of scammers out there, so don't get pulled in by them. If you want to learn about decentralized medicine on your own, you can do it free. On my website, I have a form. It'll take you 10 years to read everything on there, but it's free. And then if you want, how shall I say, more focus, like a magnifying glass, it's Jack Kruse DIY on Patreon. And then if you want more of my time, you pay, you become a member. And if you really want a lot of my time, then you pay me in Bitcoin to be your doctor, and I will allow you to rent my brain for your problem.
It's been amazing having you on the pod. Thank you.
No problem.